Hello guys and welcome back to Heir Slytherin Book 2. Hey guys, do me a favor, if you like the video, like, and if you feel like it, subscribe. It's free, so why not? Chapter 10. Christmas holidays were a welcome break for Harry. He didn't have to listen to gossip in classrooms anymore, or watch clusters of Hufflepuffs shy away in fear as he passed by them in the halls. It was relaxing. Draco stayed for holidays, as well. Mr. Malfoy was busy working with the Board of Governors of Hogwarts, trying to determine the best course of action regarding the Heir of Slytherin and the Chamber of Secrets. The Malfoys were too busy to have Draco come home. In fact, the Malfoys had been busy all year. They had promised to come watch a Quidditch match, but Mr. Malfoy was constantly being called to work, and was forced to cancel their visit. Harry jokingly suggested that he and Draco both visit the Dursleys, but after Harry's unceremonious exit at the end of the summer, it was clear that the Dursleys would not have welcomed Harry, let alone a second magical child. Crabbe and Goyle, who were often found trailing after Draco like lost puppies, had also signed up to stay for break. Thus, Harry was not surprised when he found Crabbe and Goyle locked outside the Slytherin common room. Even though Professor Snape had told them earlier that morning, they had already forgotten the new password for Christmas break. Harry was surprised to discover Pansy Parkinson locked outside the common room, as well. Pansy had left the day before on the Hogwarts Express. "I forgot a book," Pansy said. "I came back for the day to get it. My parents are having lunch down in Hogsmeade." "Pansy," Harry said, "when have you ever read a book?" Harry was teasing, but Pansy was notorious for slacking off when it came to readings for school. "I do read," she said. "Which weekly counts as reading?" Harry laughed and turned to the portal. "Pure blood," Harry said. The door opened in response to the password. The four students had barely sat down in the common room when Draco burst through the portal, waving a letter and a newspaper clipping in the air. "Have you seen this article?" Draco slammed the clipping onto the table. The article in question was about Arthur Weasley, who had recently been fined by the Ministry of Magic for bewitching a Muggle car. Draco began laughing uproariously. "Can you believe it? How ridiculous." Draco smiled and looked expectantly at Crabbe and Goyle. Oddly, neither of the large boys was laughing. Even if Crabbe and Goyle didn't understand a joke, which was often, the two would generally laugh whenever Draco laughed. Draco spoke slowly to Crabbe and Goyle. "This is why they're poor, you idiots. The Weasleys can't afford to take their family on Christmas vacation, because they're spending all their galleons on a Muggle car." Goyle began to chuckle half-heartedly. After a moment, Crabbe joined him. Draco seemed satisfied and sat back in a chair. "It's just like a Weasley," Draco said, launching into a frequently discussed subject. "Fascinated with mudbloods and Muggles. It's a wonder that they're even a pure-blood family, the way they get about. Especially Ron, always hanging around with Granger. What a pair of insufferable gits those two are." Crabbe began coughing, and Goyle pounded him on the back. "But they're not long for the school," said Pansy. "Not with the Heir around." Draco nodded. "He's doing good work. Soon, all the mudbloods will be gone from Hogwarts, one way or another." Crabbe, Goyle and Pansy leaned forward, enraptured by Draco's words. "I just wish I knew who it was," said Draco, with dramatic over-exaggeration. "I could help him. I could do something." Draco gave Harry a knowing look. Goyle sat up. "You mean you don't know who it is?" Harry rolled his eyes. "Goyle, have you had your fingers in your ears this whole term?" Draco said that about 1,000 times. After Snape's intercession, Draco had been careful to deny that he was the Heir of Slytherin. In fact, Draco had been denying it more frequently, now that he was convinced that Harry was the heir. Goyle slouched down again. "Oh. Yeah. I just thought, maybe, it was you, Draco." Draco laughed. "Not at all." Crabbe spoke up. "What about you, Harry? Are you the heir?" Harry scowled. "Shut your mouth, Crabbe, or I'll shut it for you. I have to put up with enough of those stupid Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors thinking I'm the heir. I don't want to hear it from you, too." "Yeah, Crabbe," Draco said. "Harry isn't the heir. Absolutely not. Certainly not. Definitely not." Draco finished with a wink, and Harry rolled his eyes. Draco leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Here's something new, though. My father won't tell me much about the last time the chamber was opened. It was before his time, but he did say that the last time the chamber opened, a mudblood girl died." This was news to Harry. "Someone was killed." "Yes, and it's only a matter of time before it happens again," Draco said. "Personally, I hope it's Granger, this time. That little know-it-all. Crabbe seemed agitated, as if he was ready to leap out of his seat. Pansy put a hand on his arm, and he settled down. Did they ever catch the person who opened the chamber? Pansy asked, leaving her hand on Crabbe's arm. There's a new one, thought Harry. In fact, this whole conversation was odd. Draco was the only one acting normally. Whoever it was got expelled, said Draco, but that's all that Father would tell me. Father wants the mudbloods out of Hogwarts as bad as I do, but he told me to keep my head down and let the heir of Slytherin take care of it. Goyle opened his mouth to speak, but his voice squeaked awkwardly. He tried to speak again, and his voice immediately cracked. Goyle clutched his hands to his throat and whispered, "Water," before lunging for the door. Crabbe glanced at the clock and immediately stood. "Gonna see if he's okay," Crabbe mumbled before lumbering after Goyle. "If those two were any thicker," said Draco, "they wouldn't be able to dress themselves in the morning." Pansy stood up. "I think I'm going to dash to the library. I want to see if I can find anything else about the heir of Slytherin before I go home for the rest of the holiday." Harry laughed. "Pansy, you're starting to sound like Granger." Pansy's face went white. How dare you?" She stormed out of the common room. "That was nasty, Harry. I love it." Draco folded up the newspaper clipping and tucked it back in the envelope. "Fancy a game of gobstones." Something was tickling the back of Harry's mind. Maybe later. "I think I'll catch up with Pansy, actually." Harry dashed out of the common room and saw Pansy only a few steps down the hallway. "Hey, wait." Pansy continued walking away from him. "Granger." There was a hitch in the girl's step as she reacted to Harry's voice, but she kept walking, determinedly facing away from Harry. Harry smiled to himself and ran to catch up. The two students walked down the hall, side by side, facing ahead and not looking at one another. For a few steps, neither said anything. "How'd you know?" Granger asked in Pansy's voice. "All three of you were acting strange," Harry said, "but two things stuck out. First, you said that you had forgotten a book, then you left for the library without getting it." Granger cringed, realizing her mistake. Second, Pansy would never come back to Hogwarts for a book, and she would never go to the library unless she had a paper due the next day. Granger shrugged. It was an imperfect plan, at best. And the other two must have been Ron Weasley and Neville Longbottom, said Granger. "Longbottom? I wouldn't expect that of him." Harry was impressed. "What were you trying to do?" "Ron is convinced that either the heir of Slytherin is either you or Draco. He suspects you mostly because you're a Parselmouth, which I think is rather closed-minded. Draco does seem the type, though, with all his talk of Muggleborns." Harry lowered his head. "I wish he wouldn't talk like that." By this time, Granger had mostly changed back to herself. Her hair had grown from Pansy's neat bob into its usual unwieldy bushiness, and was turning from black to brown before Harry's eyes. "Why are you friends with him?" Granger asked. "You're rather nice, whenever you aren't with Draco." "Most wizards don't treat me like a person," Harry said. "They look at my scar while they talk to me, instead of my eyes. Draco has never acted like that." "So you like him because he's rich enough that he isn't intimidated by you?" "No, I like him because he treats me normal." Harry wasn't comfortable talking about Draco like this, so he changed the subject. He and Granger were walking upstairs, now. "How'd you manage this, anyway? It wasn't an illusion or transfiguration, was it?" Granger shook her head. "Polyjuice potion. Took us months to make, hiding out in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom." "Sounds dangerous. Didn't the first attack happen right outside that bathroom?" "We needed privacy. Combine an insufferable ghost with irrational terror, and what do you get? A bathroom that nobody uses." Granger paused. "You're not going to tell anybody about this, are you?" "Probably not. It gives me a leg up on the rest of Slytherin, knowing something that they don't. And telling just for the sake of telling, that would be mean and spiteful." It sounded like something Dudley would do. "Thanks," said Granger. "It also gives me something to hold over you and Weasley." Granger grimaced. "Please don't tell Ronald. He'll be furious if he knows that I gave us away." "I won't tell him unless it's absolutely necessary," Harry said. "Is that the best I'm going to get?" "You did sneak into my common room," Harry said. The two students had stopped before a portrait of a fat woman. "You could always give me the password to Gryffindor." "I'll take my chances with you telling Ron," Granger said with a smile. The girl turned to the portrait and mumbled a password. The portrait swung open to reveal the Gryffindor common room. See you around, Harry said. He turned and began walking back to Slytherin. Harry turned back. Thanks for walking me back to Gryffindor. It was very nice of you to make sure I got back safely. Granger turned a little red. Have a Merry Christmas. Granger ducked through the open portrait and into the Gryffindor common room. Harry shook his head. He had hoped that she wouldn't notice. Chapter 11. After Christmas holidays, Flint had the Quidditch team back on the field, practicing for the upcoming match against Ravenclaw. Harry and the rest of the team watched Ravenclaw play against Gryffindor on the Saturday after classes resumed, so the Slytherin team had a good idea of what the Ravenclaw players were capable of. Flint had the team practicing constantly as the match approached. Much to Flint's annoyance, however, the final practice before their match was scheduled for Valentine's Day. Professor Lockhart announced at the beginning of the week of Valentine's Day that the heir of Slytherin had fled the school and locked the chamber, because Gilderoy Lockhart, was fast on his trail. Lockhart had then announced that he would be sponsoring a pick-me-up for the students. Lockhart's plan took the form of numerous dwarves, Harry and Warty, dressed as cherubs. The dwarves scuttled around the school on Valentine's Day, reciting poorly written poetry to the students of Hogwarts. Harry, thankfully, had managed to avoid being sent a dwarf throughout the entire day. Perhaps there was an upside to being the heir of Slytherin. Harry's luck ran out at Quidditch practice. A dwarf stood below the team on the pitch, shouting upward at Harry. Potter. Oi. Potter. Harry Potter. 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 Harry Potter. Finally, Harry lowered himself toward the ground. He stopped in the air, 10 feet above the dwarf. What do you want? I have a poem for you. The dwarf hacked and coughed, then spit on the ground, preparing to sing. No, don't. His eyes are as green as fresh pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine, he's really divine. The hero who conquered the Dark Lord. The dwarf's voice was raspy and rattling, as if he had been smoking a pipe since the day he was born. As the poem went on, Harry could feel himself turning red. Once the dwarf finished singing, the Slytherin team concealed their laughter, for about 10 seconds. Even Flint, the most stoic among them, was unable to prevent himself from chuckling. Get out of here, Harry said to the dwarf through clenched teeth. The cherubically dressed dwarf scampered away. Harry turned to the rest of the team. Be quiet, all of you. The next person to laugh gets a hex right in the eye. The team immediately fell quiet. Only Draco was still smirking. Again, Harry considered that there might be a bright side to being the heir of Slytherin. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Asterisk. Several weeks later, Harry was back at the Quidditch pitch, along with the majority of the students at Hogwarts, ready to watch the Gryffindor-Hufflepuff match. Not that the match would have any effect on the Quidditch Cup standings. Slytherin had demolished Ravenclaw, 410-40, and was leading for the cup by almost 1,000 points. But, as always, almost everybody turned out for a good Quidditch match. Only a few oddball students remained indoors. Harry caught a glimpse of Hermione Granger, for example, ducking into the library. On the way to the pitch, Harry once again heard the strange, whispering voice. Harry glanced around, trying to find its source, but in the thick crowd it was impossible. Before Harry could locate the voice, the crowd swept him along the hallway and away from the voice. Harry shook his head. He hadn't told anyone else about the voice, but he was starting to feel that it was connected to the attacks. He had heard it twice before, and each time somebody had wound up petrified. 20 minutes later, just before the match began, Professor McGonagall took over the loudspeaker. The Quidditch match is cancelled. Students will return to their dormitories immediately. Prefects, organize your houses and lead them to your dormitories. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff began booing. The Slytherin students immediately started speculating what could be so important that a Quidditch match would be cancelled. The obvious answer was another petrification. As Harry entered the castle, he saw McGonagall pull Ron Weasley out of the Gryffindor group. Harry wasn't able to hear what she said, but he saw McGonagall showing Weasley a small mirror. Weasley looked stricken. Harry glanced at the Gryffindors. There were 5 redheads clearly visible, 4 tall boys, and a smaller girl. It wasn't one of Ron's family members, then. Who else would Ron get so upset about? Granger. Of course. And Harry's speculation turned out to be correct. Hermione Granger and Penelope Clearwater were found petrified outside the library this afternoon, Snape said. He stood in front of the assembled Slytherin house in their common room. In response to the latest attack, a curfew will be imposed. No student will leave the common room after 6 o'clock in the evening. All students will be escorted to classes by a teacher. Quidditch will suspended. Pansy Parkinson's hand shot into the air. Yes, Ms. Parkinson. Professor, what about my party? Pansy had been planning her birthday party for several weeks. All signs suggested that it would be even more extravagant than last year's affair. Your party, said Snape, is cancelled until further notice. Pansy slumped down, a look of crushing disappointment on her face. In fact, nobody was happy about the latest turn of events, except for Draco. If only Granger would have died, Draco said later. Then it would have been perfect. The latest petrification reminded Harry that he had been invited by Hagrid to visit and discuss the Chamber of Secrets. That night, despite the newly imposed curfew, Harry donned his invisibility cloak and went to visit his large friend. "What are you doing here for?" Hagrid asked when he found Harry standing outside his door. "You told me that I could come and talk to you about the chamber," Harry said. "Right, that I did," said Hagrid. "Been expectin' sommit else, but we can talk. I'll make tea." Once both Hagrid and Harry were seated with tea, Hagrid let out a deep sigh. "Well, what do yer want ter know?" "Anything," Harry said. "I want to know anything I can." Granger wasn't a close friend, but she certainly was a friend. The attacks had suddenly become very personal. "It were about 50 years ago, Harry. It were a bad time for me. Muggle-born students were being attacked, and nobody felt safe. Dumbledore went even the headmaster then. It was a feller named Ditpet. I was juice in my 3rd year when the chamber were opened." Hagrid took a sip of his tea. Harry remained quiet, worried that any sound he made would break Hagrid's nerve. "I've always been interested in magical creatures, Harry. Unicorns and rocks and dragons, fascinating. That year, I found myself an acromantular egg, hidden way in the back of Professor Slughorn's potions cabinet. Fantastic thing, that. Acromantulars are really rare, and their eggs are even rarer. I didn't want it to be used in some stinkin' potion, so I snuck it out. And once I had snuck it out, I hatched it." "What's an acromantular, Hagrid?" "Acromantula," Hagrid said, over-exaggerating the end of the word to compensate for his accent. "Giant spider. They can grow up ter 10 foot tall. Poisonous, too. Real beauties. But Agragog was just a lil tyke." "Who?" "Agragog, that's what I called him. The acromantular. He was juice a lil tyke when Tom Riddle caught me with him." "Is that, Hagrid? Is that how you got expelled?" The large man let out a deep sigh. "Yes. Riddle wouldn't let me get a word in. He got convinced that Agragog were the one petrifying people, and that I was making him. Before I could do anything, he dragged me to Ditpet and I were expelled. Snapped my wand and everything. And after that, the attacks stopped." "You're right about that, Harry. Can't explain it, myself." "Could it have been Agragog?" "No," said Hagrid. "Acromantulars can't petrify things. If they attack a person, they eat them." Harry blanched, and Hagrid quickly spoke again. "Not that he would have eaten anybody, because he wouldn't ever. He knew I wouldn't approve. I'm sure of it." Harry thought for a moment. What else did he want to know about the previous attacks? "Hagrid, a Muggle-born girl got killed. Who was she? How did it happen?" "You could ask her yourself, Harry. Poor em." Hagrid was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. Harry threw his invisibility cloak over his shoulders and backed into a corner. Hagrid opened the door and discovered Dumbledore standing on his stoop. Behind Dumbledore was a short man in a striped suit and a bowler hat. "Professor Dumbledore. Minister Fudge. What a surprise." Hagrid did not sound surprised, but he did sound nervous. Come in. Would yer like some tea? I have some on." Hagrid grabbed his teacup and began refilling it. "Yes, thank you," said Dumbledore, smoothly walking to the table and lifting Harry's cup. Hagrid filled Dumbledore's teacup, then made a 3rd cup for Fudge. The 3 wizards sat around Hagrid's table. Dumbledore glanced to the corner of the room. For a moment, Harry was certain that Dumbledore knew he was there. The headmaster looked away as Fudge began to speak. "Mr. Hagrid," said Fudge, "we've come on serious business." "I've been expectin' yer to come," said Hagrid. "Surprised it's been this long, actually." "Dumbledore's protection extends very far in the halls of Hogwarts," said Fudge. "It cannot protect you forever, though. I will tell you again, Cornelius, that Hagrid has my full confidence." Dumbledore's eyes were not twinkling, they were as hard as ice. "Removing Hagrid from the grounds of Hogwarts will not help in the slightest. Dumbledore, something has to be done." The Ministry cannot sit by while Muggle-born students are attacked. And meanwhile, living on the grounds of Hogwarts is a wizard who was nearly sent to Azkaban 50 years ago, for an identical series of attacks. If it turns out that Hagrid had nothing to do with the attacks, then he'll be back immediately. But we have to take him. Take me where? Asked Hagrid. He seemed resigned to being taken, but his voice still quavered with terror. Fudge turned to Hagrid. Rubius Hagrid, at the request of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a minor magistrate of the Wizengamot has issued a warrant for your arrest. Out of courtesy to Headmaster Dumbledore, I have arrived to personally conduct you to Azkaban. There was a knock on the door. Harry looked away from the table and was surprised to see Mr. Malfoy standing in the door of Hagrid's hut. I was told, said Mr. Malfoy, that I would find the Albus Dumbledore in the gamekeeper's home. I dare say that I wouldn't call this a home, but, such as it is. How can I help you, Lucius? Asked Dumbledore. Dreadful business, this, but the Board of Governors feel that it is time for you to step aside. This is an order of suspension, Mr. Dumbledore. Lucius emphasized the word Mr. See here, said Fudge. Nobody would want Dumbledore suspended. Not now. The number of attacks, and the severity, something must be done. The board feels that Mr. Dumbledore is losing his touch. You will find all 12 signatures on the board's order. And how many did ye threaten and blackmail and bribe, Malfoy? Hagrid was on his feet, looming over the table. My, said Lucius. I understand why Hagrid is being taken to Azkaban. Losing control of his temper like that, nobody knows what might happen. Dumbledore looked up from the order of suspension. If the Board of Governors feels that I should step aside, then I must step aside, said Dumbledore looking back and forth from Fudge to Malfoy. However, I think you will find that I have only truly left this school when none here are loyal to me. Help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. Dumbledore looked at the corner where Harry stood, for the second time giving Harry the uncanny impression that Dumbledore was aware of his presence. Dumbledore stepped outside of the hut, and waited for Hagrid with a placid expression on his face. As Hagrid stepped outside the door, he said loudly, "Someone'll need to feed Fang while I'm away." "I will arrange for it," said Dumbledore, quickly covering for the non sequitur. After Hagrid closed his door, Harry collapsed to the floor. No Hagrid. No Dumbledore. No protection from the air. Harry sure hoped that Mr. Malfoy knew what he was doing. Chapter 12. The day after Hagrid's arrest, Draco announced at lunch that Hagrid was the wizard who had been expelled from Hogwarts 50 years ago, when the Chamber of Secrets had first been opened. "I'm glad that oaf is locked up again," Draco said. "He's my friend," insisted Harry. "And don't you realize how stupid you sound? If there's one person who isn't the heir of Slytherin, it's Hagrid. He doesn't have enough cunning to make a proper cup of tea, and we all know that." Harry knew from his conversation with Dumbledore that Hagrid wasn't the heir, but he had promised not to tell. Instead, he was left to defend his friend with logic. "Father finally told me the whole story," said Draco. 50 years ago, the chamber was opened. Students were petrified, and a mudblood girl was killed. The head boy, Tom Riddle, caught Hagrid with a dangerous beast. "It was an Atromandula," said Harry. "They can't petrify people. You can look it up in any book." Draco waved his hand, dismissing the argument. Hagrid was expelled and his wand was snapped. Riddle even got a special award for services to the school. It's in the trophy case if you want to see it. After Hagrid was expelled, the attacks stopped. What other proof do you need? It was difficult for Harry to admit, but the circumstances weighed against Hagrid. Not only had Hagrid been involved in the prior Chamber of Secrets incident, but his love for exotic animals was well known. The more dangerous, the better. Harry fell silent, conceding that he wouldn't win the argument without betraying Dumbledore's confidence. McGonagall, as deputy headmistress, assumed Dumbledore's duties in his absence. She managed the school ably, but the mood around Hogwarts had become distinctly sullen. Dumbledore and Hagrid were generally popular with the students, with Draco being one of few notable exceptions. Finally, there came the announcement that Harry had been dreading. McGonagall's magically amplified voice echoed through the hallways of Hogwarts. "All students to return to their house dormitories at once. All teachers to the staff room. Immediately, please." The vague nature of the announcement was clearly an attempt to avoid alarming the students. The lack of specificity made it obvious to Harry that something truly horrible had occurred. As Harry and Draco walked toward their dormitory, they passed the original message from the Heir of Slytherin, which Filch had been unable to remove from the wall. Below was a new message, written in fresh blood: "Her body will lie in the chamber forever." Draco was excited. "This is it, Harry. The Heir has finally killed a mudblood and Hogwarts will be closed for the year. Dumbledore will never recover from this. My father will be next in line as headmaster, I bet. Or maybe Snape. Draco, if they can't stop the Heir, Hogwarts will never reopen. Then we'll both go to Durmstrang. Harry, this is great news. You realize that this means that Hagrid isn't the Heir, right?" Draco was stopped for a moment by the force of Harry's logic. He probably has an accomplice. Or something. Once in Slytherin, Harry and Draco were informed by their prefects that Hogwarts would, in fact, be closing for the year. Students would remain at Hogwarts for one more night. They would be confined to their dormitories for their safety, and to provide time for the students to pack their belongings. Tomorrow morning, all students would be returning home via the Hogwarts Express. Students would be escorted to dinner by house prefects. At dinner, the members of Slytherin were desperate to determine who had been taken into the chamber. "We just have to see which mudblood is missing," said Draco, looking around the Great Hall. While Draco and Pansy surveyed the Hufflepuffs, Harry's eye was drawn to the Gryffindor table, where Ron Weasley seemed despondent. Weasley had been much quieter after Granger's petrification, but this seemed worse, somehow. Fred, George and Percy Weasley had similar expressions on their faces. Harry looked to see if the youngest Weasley was also distraught, but the red-headed girl was missing from the Gryffindor table. "Draco, I think it's the Weasley girl." Draco scoffed and continued surveying the Hufflepuffs. "She's a pure blood. A blood traitor, no doubt, but still a pure blood. The Heir would never take her." Harry wasn't sure. After dinner, Harry found Ron slowly dragging his feet toward Gryffindor Tower. The hallway was quickly becoming empty, as the remainder of the student body rushed toward the relative safety of their common rooms. As Harry started speaking, the last of the students turned the corner, leaving Harry and Weasley alone. "Oh, Weasley. I didn't see your sister at dinner." Ron's wand was suddenly drawn and pointed at Harry's nose. "You shut up about her, you snake." Harry held up his hands. "Weasley, hold on. I just didn't see her at dinner. Is she okay?" "You did this. It's you and your stupid Slytherins." "I didn't do anything, Weasley." "I know it's you, Potter. I know it." Harry's temper snapped. "Damn it, Weasley, if I was the Heir of Slytherin I would have killed you at Christmas." Ron's mouth dropped open and he lowered his wand a fraction. Harry slapped the wand away from his face. "How do you know about that?" Ron asked. "I figured out that Granger was impersonating Pansy. While you and Longbottom were off saving your own hides, I made sure that Granger got back to Gryffindor Tower safely. If I were the Heir, I would have killed her then. And I would have killed you and Longbottom for daring to trespass in my common room. But here you are, still alive and stupid, because I am not the Heir." By the time Harry finished speaking, he was screaming, inches from Weasley's face. Ron turned away. All his anger was gone. Harry could see that, under the rage, the Gryffindor boy was barely holding himself together. "She's in the chamber, okay? My sister. Ginny. McGonagall told us before dinner. I keep telling myself there's a chance Ginny's okay, but..." Ron paused, obviously struggling to hold back tears. "But I know I'm never going to see her again. Come on, Weasley. The professors are looking for her." Ron shook his head. "Nobody will go to the chamber. I heard McGonagall and Snape talking to Lockhart about it. Lockhart said he knew where it was. The teachers told him to go and save her, but I know he's a fraud. He's too scared to go. And even if he did show us where it was, none of the professors would fight a basilisk." What?" Ron reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Hermione figured it out. I found this in her hand when I visited her in the hospital wing, after she got petrified. The horror of the chamber is a basilisk. It's a giant serpent whose gaze will kill anybody who makes eye contact." "You told the professors about this, right?" Harry said. "Nobody cared," Ron said. "They listened to a word or two, then ignored me." "Maybe it isn't a basilisk," Harry said. "Nobody has been killed." Harry mentally ticked through the list of victims. Because everybody has been seeing it through reflections and ghosts and cameras. They aren't getting the direct look, so they're just petrified. Ron, there's a chance the same thing happened to your sister. Did you read the message on the wall, or were you too thick to understand it?" Ron's voice quavered. Her body will lie in the chamber forever, Potter. Come on, Ron, said Harry, grabbing Ron by the arm. We're going to go talk to somebody about this. Which is how the boys wound up in the office of Severus Snape. Snape's office was gloomy and dark, much like Professor Snape himself. There were portions and ingredients on shelves throughout the room, and a large, dark wood cabinet stood against one wall. The cabinet was always locked, and Harry suspected that it contained dangerous and rare ingredients for potions. Ron was too intimidated to speak directly to Professor Snape. Instead, it fell to Harry to explain why they suspected a basilisk, and why Ginny might still be alive to be rescued. Initially, Snape's face was hard and skeptical. But, as Harry forged deeper into the explanation, he saw Snape's face soften, and then grow curious. But by the time that Harry had finished speaking, Snape's face was once again an impassive mask. Potter, Weasley, thank you for informing the staff of your discovery regarding the basilisk. Unfortunately, there is little we can do, as we do not know the location of the chamber. Yes, you do. Ron protested. It was the first time he had spoken in the meeting. He seemed shocked at the volume of his voice, but he forged onward. Yesterday I heard you say that Professor Lockhart knew where it was. If Professor Lockhart's magical talent were half the size of his ego, he would be a wizard to rival Albus Dumbledore. Alas, such is not the case. Lockhart is full of hot air. I have never met a bigger windbag in all my years of teaching. Ron and Harry looked at one another with surprise. The students had been expressing similar sentiments all year, but it was shocking to hear a professor articulate their feelings so clearly. Professor, the basilisk is a serpent, so it would speak Parseltongue, correct? Harry asked. Snape nodded. Correct, Potter. Harry suddenly sat erect. Then that's the voice I've been hearing. Snape and Ron both looked at Harry oddly. I've been hearing a strange voice all year long. I didn't want to tell anybody, because they'd think I was crazy. But the first time I heard it was just before we found Mrs. Norris on Halloween. Then I heard it again, just before I found Finch Fletchy, and again the morning before Hermione was attacked. I've been hearing the basilisk, shouted Harry. I'm not going crazy, I've just been hearing the basilisk moving around the school. Snape shook his head. Potter, if a beast of that size moved that freely around the school, surely somebody would have discovered it by now. Ron slammed the crumpled piece of paper on Snape's desk and pointed at a note written in the clear handwriting of Hermione Granger. Pipes. It's using the pipes. Hermione figured it out. Snape looked at the paper and slowly raised his eyebrows. Indeed, that would be possible. Again, I am impressed, Mr. Weasley, but that still does not tell us the location of the chamber. Harry smiled slowly. Yes, sir, it does. Hagrid's last, interrupted sentence finally made sense. Professor, Mrs. Norris was petrified because she only saw a reflection of the basilisk in a puddle of water outside a flooded bathroom. Both of the heir's messages were written outside a bathroom. And where better to gain access to the pipes than a bathroom? I find it unlikely that the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is hidden in a lavatory, Snape said. But there's a way we can know for sure, Harry said. 50 years ago, a girl was killed when the Chamber of Secrets was opened. Hagrid told me that I could ask her how she was killed. We need to ask Moaning Myrtle how she died. Snape's eyebrows drew together, and he made a small sound of surprise. There is no time to waste. This mystery must be solved immediately. The two of you will follow me. Potter, if you hear any mysterious voices, inform me immediately. Snape stood and swept out of the room, wand drawn. Harry and Ron trotted behind. Harry gave Ron a small, hopeful smile. There was a chance that things would work out, after all. Even though Ron might not like it, Harry thought that Snape was a great wizard. If there was anybody left in the school who could save Ginny, Harry was sure that it was Snape.